So, it's been a while since I've made a video. The holiday seasons were rough, time was not on my side, and the new year started with a lot of not great stuff. But I'm gonna try to get back into the swing of things when it comes to this YouTube channel. And the first thing that I want to start off with is doing more fun videos about the students of Class 1A. Because with the new year, there are new starts, either with setting New Year's goals, or maybe wanting to change a career for the upcoming year. And with what we got with the extra chapters of My Hero Academia, I want to talk about what would have happened if the students decided to be something else other than heroes. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy Manga, and I'm here to talk about what if the students of Class 1A didn't become heroes and had different jobs. And the main focus of this video is going to be tackling the idea of what the students are going to potentially be able to do once their hero careers are over, or if they decided not to go down the hero path. And the reasoning why I came up with this idea is because with the last chapters of My Hero Academia, there seems to be a strong focus on the characters doing things outside of basic heroics and rescue. We know that Deku became a teacher even while he can be a hero now, and would decide to be a teacher even if he had the quirk of One for All. Then we see Uraraka participating as both a hero as well as a counselor to the students, as well as Shoto wanting to do something after he becomes a hero when it comes to Soba, as well as in the background seeing characters doing jobs that are not necessarily the idea of being a pro hero. So with all of that in mind, I want to dive into potentially what each one of the Class A students would be if they weren't necessarily a hero. And to determine that, we're going to be looking at their characters as well as their quirks. Because while they could take on jobs that were heavily associated with their quirks, I think also focusing on their personalities would be better, because we would want them to have a job or a career that they would enjoy doing. And I'll try to go through all 20 students and maybe even Shinzo to determine whether or not a job would be best suited for them more than just being a hero. And without the way, let's just dive right into it. Starting off with Aoyama Yuga. And I think this is going to be a little bit difficult to determine for him. But I think that if I would put him to be any type of job, it would actually be either a fashion designer or general entertainer. And I think that fits most, especially when it comes to someone else that we're going to talk about later on. But because Aoyama is so flamboyant and is stereotypically you could code as being gay, you could make the same assumption when it comes to a fashion designer, especially with how flamboyant he is. And if you don't want to go with that, a general entertainer could also work, because we know that while not necessarily something that he wanted to do, he was able to become a disco ball and help entertain the people. And with his flashing lights and his flamboyant nature, him being a general entertainer using his quirk would fit Aoyama best. But yeah, he's always wanted to be a hero, but I think that he could potentially be a good fashion designer. And speaking of fashion, next up is Mina Ashido, who I think would be a influencer or professional dancer. And along the same line as Aoyama, Ashido has been shown and stated to be very flashy with her quirk, which is why they think that she would make for a great hero. However, the first time we saw her in the past, she was able to teach kids how to break dance and join together and be friends. And then later on, during the cultural festival, she also was able to teach both Aoyama as well as Deku how to dance and break dance. So with that being very niche to Mina, her being a background dancer or professional dancer would make very much sense within the world and her personality. And when it comes to an influencer, well, I think that's also very obvious. When it comes to her personality, her aesthetic, her being a gal-inspired character, she would very much be more in line with an influencer, but she could be working with beauty products as a beauty influencer. Maybe she would just be a general YouTuber when it comes to influencer. There's a lot of things that Mina could do with the title of influencer, which is why I wouldn't specifically nail her down to be one specific influencer, but an influencer overall. But now that we're going from more of the flashier jobs, let's go for a more simplistic job when it comes to Suyu Asui, who would most likely be a lifeguard or a professional swimmer. Professional swimmer, I think that's very apparent. She's a frog. Frogs are very much known to live underwater and be able to swim, but also because throughout the series we've seen that because her quirk has changed her body in this way, she is very adept in water and is able to swim extremely fast and extremely well. So in the world of My Hero Academia, where you have individuals who may have more aquatic based quirks participating in potential entertainment as being swimming competitions, her being a professional swimmer would fit best. But in a situation where she may not necessarily be able to become a professional swimmer, I think it's very apparent that she would become a lifeguard. And that's solely based off the anime original episodes where she's literally working with Silky as well as the other individuals as pretty much, if not lifeguard adjacent characters, basically working as Coast Guard individuals. So if anything, I could see her with her abilities to swim in the water, as well as her want to help and save people, that she would still be in a more heroic field, but less in a pro hero fashion, but more of a lifeguard or Coast Guard, where she could still help people who are drowning out at sea as a Coast Guard, or even help people who may be drowning in a local pool or a local lake, ergo being a lifeguard. And that's going to be a running theme with a lot of the characters and a lot of the Class 1A members, where the jobs that they're going to have are going to be inherently more helpful and more influential when it comes to helping and saving people, because they chose to be heroes in the first place. So of course they would pick professions that are more suited to helping and saving people. And that's important when it comes to Tenya Ida, where he would most likely be a police officer or a generic salaryman. Now, don't get me wrong, we need salaryman in the world. However, Tenya Ida is the most stereotypical looking and acting salaryman character you could ever have in a series based in Japan. From his aesthetics to his actions to how he moves, he's very generic and very rigid, which is very much synonymous with the Japanese salaryman. And the same thing can be said for the police officers in Japan as well, wearing uniform, being very stiff, but also their jobs are to help people and to stop criminals, which we learned that being from a pro hero background, that is something that was very much ingrained in Ida's ideal to do. And how that idea is really no different than how we see American sitcoms and shows based off police officers, and how you have shows where being a police officer runs in the family. Ergo, it would also run in the family of Tenya Ida. They're fast and they'll be able to catch the criminals fast. All right, I'll just move on. And speaking of characters who would still be heroes even in less heroic jobs, we have Uraraka Ochako, who would most likely be either a social worker, a therapist, or curveball circus performer. All right. I'll tackle the circus performer aspect, and that's just very simplistic. She likes to make people laugh. She wants to see people smile. And what does that better than being a circus performer? Now, it could be any type of like generic performer that she could do to make people laugh, but when you think of things that make people laugh, to me, being a circus performer is the first thing that comes to mind. Either she could be a literal clown and telling very bad jokes, or she could be more of an acrobatic character in the circus with her floating abilities, which would prevent her, as well as her other fellow performers, from falling to their deaths, making the circus a little bit safer for them and everyone else. And therapist and social worker kind of go hand in hand. While they are different sects when it comes to working and helping with people, we see that that's kind of what she's doing right now. She's being a pseudo therapist and social worker in the manga at its end, either helping and encouraging people and making sure that they're on a more appropriate path with using their quirks, which could be in line with what a social worker would do, but also having therapeutic aspects of it by comforting the individual and making them feel loved. And people talk about the idea how Toga should have gone to therapy, and we see that that has influenced Uraraka in a way for her to kind of do that. So it just makes sense for her to be a sort of therapist social worker when it comes to the end of the series and having another job outside of just being a pro hero. And speaking of going pro, we have Mashiro Ojiro, and I think it's very straightforward. He would either be a martial arts instructor, because of course he is. Look at his gi. He's literally wearing a black belt. He literally does martial arts. Or, even more interesting, professional MMA fighter. Because just think about it like this, it's mixed martial arts. What's more mixed into the art of martial arts than having a extra limb? Now, obviously, if he was to be in a mixed martial art in the world of My Hero Academia, it would be a little bit more like a cage fight with more characters who may have more heteromorphic quirks, but he is very much adept in martial arts. All he does is having an additional limb. So most likely he would actually do fairly well in mixed martial arts just by the fact that he has an additional limb that's able to allow him to grapple, allow him to punch and kick, as well as just being another appendage that can do a little bit more damage. Like I said, most likely he would be a grappler and use his tail to grapple his enemies, which we've seen that he's capable of doing decently well. And now we're getting more towards like the more obvious when it comes to the characters and what they would do outside of being a pro hero. Denki Kaminari would be an electrician because of course he would. Not necessarily the most intelligent, so we can't put him in like more of an engineering course. However, being an electrician and knowing how electricity flows and not being shocked by it would be very beneficial for someone who's an electrician. And it does not require a high ceiling of skill, which is very important for Kaminari because he's not that smart. And speaking of people who are not that smart, we have Ejiro Kirishima, who would most likely be a professional trainer / motivational speaker. I mean, come on, he's a manly man. He will always tell people how manly they are. And when it just comes to Kirishima, he's just someone who's very uplifting and inspiring for others, even to the point where in the actual series Popper, they are actually doing a sort of documentary series on the rise of Kirishima and his heroic aspect. So it just makes sense that if he was not necessarily a pro hero, he would be a motivational speaker just by how positive and bubbly he can be and how he's very much able to lift people up and inspire other peoples to do greatness. Or he will be a personal trainer because nothing is more manly than training and punching and boxing and muscles. But yeah, two very obvious jobs that Kirishima could do. And alongside very obvious jobs, you have Koji Koda, who would either be a vet assistant, or a zookeeper. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Every time I see Koji, I just think to myself, oh my gosh, he would make the perfect vet. Not only can he control animals and most likely communicate with them, by doing so, he would be able to be and you can add animal trainer on this as well, be able to keep them still so they don't move for the examinations. He could be able to communicate with them to see what may be more wrong with them, since we naturally cannot speak or communicate with animals via speech. And he would be able to build a connection with them, which would make it easier for him to feed them so he doesn't have to worry about being mauled. So yeah, being a vet outside of being a professional hero may be the best suited for Koji Koda than being a professional hero, in my opinion. But now we go to Rikoto Sato, and I think it's very obvious what he would be. Cook, baker, chef. It has nothing to do with his quirk. We just know that he knows how to bake cakes well, so him being any form of like in the food industry just makes sense for him. Whether or not he's able to use his quirk is a non-factor because he knows how to cook, bake, and all that cool stuff. So yeah, that was very simple, but now we're going with Mezzo Shoji, and I think this is a little bit more not obvious, because if we base it off of what we see in the actual story itself, he would most likely be a sort of diplomat, because we saw that he was awarded a prize for his contributions to helping to end discrimination between heteromorphs and everyone else. So him being a diplomat in the real world and trying to build connections and end discrimination around the world makes sense in our real world and even in the world of My Hero Academia. However, a second thing that I think that he would do is not necessarily a job, but that he may actually end up being a monk. And this comes from the fact that Shoji, as from what we see, is more or less a minimalist, with his room, which has very minimal stuff in it, as well as when it comes to his personality, where he's more calm and collected. And I think that these would be traits that you would attribute more to being a monk, especially when it comes to Shoji and him being a little bit more not just gung-ho about fighting and is more concerned about protecting and saving people than anything else. So I think being a diplomat makes sense, but also being a monk makes sense for Shoji as well. And now going from someone from a little less obvious to a lot more obvious is Kyoka Jiro. And do I really need to say any more? Rock star, singer, music instructor. She already wanted to incorporate music and her love of music into being a pro hero, so her just being a rock star, general musician, anything doing with music as a job just makes sense for her. Because not only does she love music, but her quirk is literally earphone jack, so she can literally create music potentially with her own heartbeat. So yeah, very cut and dry, very obvious. Now let's go over to Hanta Zero. And here's something that she may not think about. I think Hanta Zero would either make for an amazing comedian or very good with home decor, or even maybe an architect. And I say this because Hanta Zero, for the most part, is a very much comic relief character in the world of My Hero Academia, where we see in the series he's always making jokes and slight jabs at characters, especially Bakugo. So it makes sense that he would be more of a comedian in another profession outside of being a hero. However, we do know that he has like a slight eye for when it comes to like home decor and decoration when we saw his room being decked out to the nines during the students' contest to rank each other's room. And it wasn't like a, oh wow, this is like a little bit nice. No, it was very much decked out with like a Chinese aesthetic, and even him personally is very fashionable himself. So I think that with that small scene in mind, as well as when it comes to his personality, I think working with home decor or even architecture wouldn't be that much of a stretch. But someone else that is a little bit of a stretch when it comes to their characterization and what job they would do outside of the hero work, and I can't really stick to it that well, is probably going to be Tokoyami Fumikage. And here's the thing. We know that Tokoyami very much is like a brooding edgelord who likes dimly lit spaces. And it's very difficult to find a job that would be perfect for Tokoyami, especially if we just restrict it to the world of My Hero Academia. Because he could be running a dimly lit bar that has very much like a dark, revel in the darkness aesthetic. And some people that I've seen would say that he would be a writer or a mangaka of potentially dark fantasy. But if we're going to be real, if he was in our real world, he would be working at Hot Topic. I mean, it's literally a store that sells like edgy, gothy like stuff in a dimly lit room. I'm just saying, that's just perfect in my opinion. But now we're getting to the final stretch, where we're going to have a little bit more ease and a little bit more difficulty pinning down these characters' jobs if they were outside of being heroes. But one of them is not that hard, and it's Shoto Todoroki, and he would very much be someone who would want to learn how to make soba as a soba maker, or making bowls to eat soba in. I mean, that's kind of what the last chapter pretty much entails, that when he's done with heroics, which is going to be sooner rather than later, that he's going to learn, if not he's learning now, how to make pottery to eat soba. Like, soba wasn't like this big thing about Shoto's character, but it is a connection that he has with not only his older brother Natsuo, but a connection that he was able to build with Toya at the end, or towards the end of the manga proper. So it makes sense that he would probably pursue a career where he would either start making soba noodles or create bowls to eat soba with, when it comes to the thematic connection that he has with not just his family, but with the story that he has been told and shown. Doing what he wants and doing what he loves outside of necessarily the influence of his family because of what he wants to do. And he wanted to be a hero, but now he wants to do something else, and those are two potential aspects that he can do outside being a pro hero. I also threw around the idea that he could potentially be a paramedic, only because of all of the characters in Class 1A, he's the one that just actively carries around like medical supplies, like ointment. So it makes sense that he would potentially also pursue a field like that, where he would just be carrying around these supplies with him, if not on his person, in the ambulance that he would potentially be driving. But going from Shoto, we have Hagakure Toru, who would most likely be a fashion designer slash lighting manager. Yeah, this ties into Aoyama, who has a connection with Hagakure when it comes to his lasers, as well as the fact that he could shoot lasers at her and she can reflect and refract the light. So yeah, her being in charge of lighting either on movie sets or during fashion shows makes sense, because she would know exactly where the light could be going or it needs to go, so she can change and like reflect it in certain ways. And you can also see Toru Hagakure as being a fashion model, not only because I put also Aoyama as being a fashion designer in their connection, but also because that's kind of what she was towards the end of the series. Because there's just a small little image where we see Tokoyami as well as Hagakure either being models or being advertisement for certain products. So while you could also say that she could also be a makeup artist as well due to that as well, I would find it funnier if she was more or less a fashion model and that she could model the clothing on her body and she would get popular not necessarily because of her face or her proportions, but the gimmick of her being invisible, but the fashion still looking good on her. So yeah, it's more gaggy than anything else, but it still wouldn't make sense, especially if she would be able to control the light enough to be able to show off her body while also wearing a dress. But now we're getting down to the last four, where we have Katsuki, Bakugo, and I think it's very obvious, Drill Sergeant. And this is very apparent because if you don't notice, while he is very much arrogant and loud and boisterous, he's also a lot more clean cut and put together than you think. Because we've seen in a few images how he's very adamant about brushing his teeth, as well as making sure that he's like neat and tidy, especially with his connection with Best Genius and how he has a tidy crew very much in line with being in the army. We also see that he's very great at interrogating as well as putting people on edge, which is something that is very stereotypically associated with a drill sergeant. So when it comes to his personality and like how he carries himself, I think him being in the military as a drill sergeant makes the most sense, as well as it would put him above other people, which is something that he kind of likes to do. And going from Bakugo, it's best to go on to Izuku Midoriya Deku, who is a teacher. And many people suggested that he could have been a police officer, as All Might said at the beginning of the story, but I think that him being a teacher makes sense. Not only did he lose his quirk, which means that he had to become a teacher like All Might and Aizawa, we see that he's able to influence people more as a teacher than he can purely as a pro hero. And with his conversation and interactions with Tomura Shigaraki, he realized that the best thing that he could do to prevent Tomura Shigaraki from existing again is by helping educate and influence the youth and better society as a whole than just doing it as a hero. So him being a teacher, which in many opinions and many ideas is a thankless job that everyone needs and is probably one of the more valuable jobs that we should give credit to for them doing it, it makes sense that Deku would be a teacher because he would be there to help everyone in more ways than just saving them. And next up we have Minoru Mineta. And I know, many people do not like Mineta because he's a pervert, which would make it a little bit more difficult for him to potentially get a more appropriate job for his personality. And because he's so hated, people would suggest that he would be like a crypto bro or an investor. But we have to take into account that while yes, Mineta is very much a pervert, he is not a bad person. Yeah, he has done some very questionable things, but he still chose to be a hero to help people. And if we go by the idea that, oh, he wanted to be cool, what is the best punishment for his crimes? To give him jobs that are somewhat cool, but are also stereotypically nerdy and not the most attractive jobs. Ergo, IT, any form of engineering. Even funnier, being a podcaster where he thinks that he's all hot stuff, but people watch him just to make fun of him and poke at him. But yeah, it was very hard to really pick jobs for Mineta, especially with his stature, but those are the ones that I came up with. And finally, saving the best for last is Momo Yarurozu. And this is both the easiest and hardest person to have jobs with, because with her quirk, she could pretty much do and be anything. She could be a scientist when it comes to her intelligence and being able to make chemicals out of her body straight from like flasks and test tubes themselves. She could technically work in manufacturing because her body itself can be a manufacturer, and she could also be like an engineer. She could also be like working with her hands and creating tools because she would have to be able to know how they work and can recreate it. Heck, she could go into any like more higher level profession like doctor, lawyer, surgeon, just by her knowledge itself. But I think probably the job that is best suited for her is very in line with what we saw with Deku. But instead of her just being a teacher, she would be more of a professor. Because I think that she has a lot of the character qualities that people may associate with Deku when it comes to teaching, but she can do it even more because she's canonically more intelligent than Deku, knows a lot more about a lot more stuff than Deku, where Deku is more tailored towards heroism. Momo has a more broader and general knowledge. So I think that her just being a professor or even being a teacher makes sense because she also likes to help people. And we saw that with her interactions with her fellow classmates, how she got joy from teaching them. And that can also be seen by her also helping Uraraka when it comes to her endeavor as well. So her being a professor slash teacher makes the most sense because she could do that and also teach and be professor of all of the other subjects that I brought up when it involves her and her intelligence. But yeah, those are all of the jobs I think the characters of Class 1A would have if they were in the real world or were not pursuing the career of being a professional hero. Also, there's Shinzo, but that's a little bit more difficult. I think that he would just follow in the footsteps of Aizawa and also be a teacher. He wouldn't be a great one, but I would see him following down that same line and being a teacher. But yeah, that's everyone. And let me ask you this. What do you think these students would do if they weren't pro heroes? Leave your thoughts down below and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. I'll try to be putting out more content within the following weeks, so stay tuned. So do all that cool jazz and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!